Wales, 1814. The lake did not exist in spring. By autumn it had a name. By winter it had a story. They say that when the wind comes down the pass and strikes the water flat as glass, you can hear a bell tolling beneath the surface. Not once, rhythm. Not imagination, tone. A church bell, too large to be a sheep's bell, and too solemn to be a fisherman's joke. The old men put their hands to their caps and say the name of the village that isn't there anymore, the drowned place, the one the map forgot to keep. Before we go any further, subscribe and tap the bell. Around here, we tell the stories most people would rather forget. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. These waterbound mysteries are scattered around every coast and valley. Stay with me to the end. There's a single pencil line in a parish book that shifts this from legend to ledger. Names are altered, some records conflict. What follows is pieced from estate papers, parish registers, a surveyor's field book, 3 letters left in a drawer for a century, and testimony from a hearing that changed nothing. We'll show what can be known, and the best explanations for what refuses to sit still. The valley was Cwm Ffynnon, Spring Vale, 2 miles of pasture and scattered cottages lying between stone shoulders that kept weather like a grudge. A stream called the Afon Llechbytyn threaded it, shallow and quick, walled with alder and ash. There was a small church, Eglwys Sant Idwal, with a square tower and a bell cast in 1713 by a man who stamped his name on the rim with such pride the letters stood up like teeth. There was a school in the vestry 2 days a week, and a smith who could fix a wheel and a jaw with equal stubbornness. 48 souls wintered there most years. They were not rich. They were not poor enough to draw pity from uphill. To the south sat Glenfor Hall and its owner, called him Sir Owain Pritchard, whose money came from wool in his grandfather's time and iron in his father's. The Napoleonic Wars had driven the price of both high, and the canals hungry for steady water. In 1810, a surveyor with an eye for angles stood where the stream narrowed between 2 outcrops and said, "Careful, a wall there would hold a lake large enough to turn wheels and feed a lock." Sir Owain liked sentences with hold, turn and feed in them. In 1811, he petitioned to impound the Llechbytyn for the improvement of navigation and industry. The plan was an earthen dam faced with stone and a spillway cut shy to keep the lake always hungry. Compensation would be paid. Cottages of inferior quality would be replaced by commodious habitations on the ridge above. The church would be removed to a more advantageous situation. The ink on those phrases is steady and dry. The space between the words and the work was wetter. Work began in 1812. Irish hands and local hands moved earth. A quarry awoke. Drays groaned. The stream was diverted through a plank-lined race while men piled clay and stone. The valley's people watched and made the best of things that could not be stopped without a fight no one believed they would win. 6 cottages went up along the lane to the new place. A 7th waited on timber that didn't arrive. The school was promised a larger room. The promise held like wind holds a hand. And the church. The plan, written and signed, was to dismantle Sant Idwal stone by stone, re-erect it on the ridge, and remove the bell to the new tower for the preservation of customary worship. A mason measured, chalked, numbered. The first 3 courses of the nave came down and stacked neat as bread. Then the weather turned. Then a barge of Portland cement went missing in the Menai Strait. Then a harvest ran late, and the men were promised more coin if they'd take their shovels to the dam instead of the tower for just a fortnight, and then another. On Michaelmas, the vicar, call him Dafydd Wynn, wrote in the parish book, "Removed altar rail to safer place above, bell to be taken next fair weather, people uneasy." The fair weather didn't come in time. By late summer 1814, the wall stood hip-high to a giant. The race was shuttered. The stream was told to learn stillness and obeyed. Water shouldered out into pasture, up to the hedge where a boy had carved his initials, onto the flat stones where women had washed wool for a century. Men rolled up rugs. Women took icons from the church and wrapped them in shawls. The last harvest cart creaked up the lane to the ridge, and the valley changed color, then shape, then name. There are dates the water keeps more precisely than paper. The people of Cwm Ffynnon climbed at dusk on a Thursday to watch the lake wet the last dry step of the church threshold. The men had nailed a board across it the day before, as if a plank could bless a door against a lake. They say the bell rang once, not from the tower, but from the hill above where 3 boys had brought it on a travois, while the mason cursed the delay, and the vicar prayed in English he didn't believe, and Welsh that sounded like a song he meant to sing even if nobody else would. If they'd got it up, why did it later sound from underwater? Hold that question. It's the heart of our trouble. The board of the canal congratulated Sir Owain in a letter polite enough to cut. The lock at Cheffin Glass ran smooth. The ironworks downstream wrote about the lake's admirable regularity. Fishermen at the new water caught trout that had never seen sky so big. On some nights, when the wind came down the pass like a hand, people along the shore heard what they heard. A bell, muffled and deep, counting time for a congregation under 20 feet of cold. Reporters came and wrote about the Welsh Atlantis like gentlemen on a lark. The board called it a superstition and pointed to a shepherd's bell tinkling somewhere back in the heather as the likely source. But if you ask the men who had patched boats on that lake and the women who had plucked cress at its rim, they'll tell you where the sound stood on the water, and they'll all point to the same spot where the tower had been. Here's where the story splits in two and then into more. The Pritchard estate has a ledger. In September of that year, between entries for picks and salt beef, someone wrote, in a hand not the head clerk's, tenor bell to be removed when water abates. The tenor is the largest bell. The note has a small smear where the pen decided whether to write if or when. In the vicar's book, a week later, bell not yet moved, danger to those who would. Underneath, narrower and backwards to the line as if added by a tired hand, Indians. A code, a joke, a poor copy of inund, for inundation. You can read papers all day and still not be sure what a man meant when he tried to write fast. Winter 1814 hit the dam like a test. Rains, then frost, then a thaw with a mean temper. The spillway took most of it. The lake climbed anyway. Noise changed. Water began to speak in a language men on shores never like to hear. A constant low vowel that settles under your bones. The villagers on the ridge, now learning their new doors and how badly the wind knew them, woke at night to the bell's voice. Some counted, many did not. Quick pause. What's your first theory? Psyche waves, setting a suspended bell swinging underwater, wind carrying sound from a church miles away and laying it as a trick on the lake. Men at night with a line and a daft idea. Drop your guess in the comments. I'll pin the sharpest one and return with follow-up notes. The first to go down and look was a slate cutter named Ifan Bryn. In summer, the lake could be a green eye, calm as a kept promise. By July 1815, Ifan had rigged a crude glass box, 3 panes in a frame, with which to look down from a boat. He tied a rope under his arms, laid flat, and peered. He saw what we would expect, walls where walls had been, softened by silt, a hedge like a black comb lying on its side, a roof beam at the edge of a drop where the ground had remembered it used to be a stream. He swore he saw the church's tower intact. Others who tried later said the same. One said there was a glint that could have been the bell. One said there was only shadow and a fish that looked at him like a man thinking of something he couldn't say. No one brought up anything that could argue with paper. The board convened a hearing in the spring of 1816, not about bells, those were for wives' tales, but about cracks. The dam had settled at one end and spat water out of a seam like a tooth holding a mud secret. 2 foremen argued over who had been told to ram more clay. The engineer said the crack was expected. Sir Owain said the engineer had been expected to avoid the crack. The vicar came uninvited and brought the parish book. They let him wait until a chair was empty. He said 3 things that mattered and 1 that didn't. The 3 that mattered: the church was promised to be moved and was not. The graves were promised to be lifted and reburied and were not all lifted. The bell was promised to be carried and was not carried. The thing that didn't matter to the board but mattered to everyone else: people heard it, at night and sometimes by noon. Not imagination, he said, his hands open. A count. The clerk wrote superstition in the margin and underlined it twice. A letter turned up a century later in a box marked Miss. It was addressed to Sir Owain by his steward and never sent. It reads, "The men have asked for hazard pay to climb to the tower to take the bell. They are not cowards. The mortar is weak in the upper courses. The water rose before the rope hoists were rigged. If a man is to die, let it be for something that happens on its own and not for our asking." The letter never left the drawer. The bell, If it was there, stayed with the tower. You've waited for the pencil line. It sits on the back flyleaf of the parish book, in the vicar's hand, faint and straight. If it tolls without a hand, we shall keep our hands. It is not law, it is the rule they made to feel less helpless. It explains nothing. It explains everything that men did not do after. Let's talk explanations, plain and otherwise. The Seiche. Lakes rock. Wind pushes water to one shore. When the force drops, the water sloshes back. In narrow lakes flanked by cliffs, that slosh can be regular, a period measured in minutes, and strong enough to move something that wants to swing. If the bell was still in its yoke, and if the mouth of the tower lay in the current of that pulsing thing, the clapper could kiss the bell. Metal voices carry underwater, the low tones choose long paths. Standing on the shore, the sound might rise from always the same place. It fits physics and refuses specifics. For this to work, the bell must be there, the clapper must be free, and the water must do then what water does when it wants to make a fool of us, act like a hand. The trick of sound. Wind, temperature, and terrain will pick up a sound from miles away and lay it in a place where no one wanted it. The old stories of the bells of Aberdofi tell of seamen hearing a drowned church when the wind is in the right quarter, which is to say, they heard a bell somewhere else. St. Idwal's bell, so the estate insisted, had been removed to the new church on the ridge, but that bell, when rung, sound, it up and away, not down and across. On nights when the lake rang, the ridge was quiet. If you prefer this theory, say ventriloquism, and let the wind do the rest. There are facts that pin the story to earth. In 1823, drought bled the lake down to a cuff of mud. Boys waded out to where the tower had been and came back with a handful of lead that a tinker melted into shot. A surveyor wrote, "Footings of church visible, lower courses intact, bell not observed." But a boy from the ridge came home with a hard bruise on his shin and told his grandmother he had struck a thing round like the lip of a pot. He put his hand to the air and made the shape of a circle too wide for a pot. In 1831, a travelling bell founder named Hughes recorded that he recast the treble bell of St. Idwal's on the ridge, together with a fine tenor of ancient make, provenance uncertain. Some hear in that a confession, others hear only a craftsman bragging that the big one came out well. By mid-century, the sound had become part of how people told time when the weather came bad. "It's 7 by the lake," a woman would say, and stir the pot, and her daughter would know what she meant, though she'd never lived below the waterline. Sir Owain died with his accounts in order, and his conscience exactly as balanced as such men prefer. The canal's demand changed, the lake became a thing fishermen loved, and the valley's name wore off a little more each generation. Then, now and again, someone would stop on the shore when the sky strained, and the smallest things in the body heard a tone in the bones and felt less alone and more afraid at the same time. You stayed. Here's the other piece the paper kept that the stories didn't, a slip in the parish register of burials. 26th November 1814, Rentement, 6 remains from the churchyard of St. Idwal, others not found, service shortened for weather. And under it, in a last small line from the vicar that no one asked him to write and no one paid him to mean, "Those we could not gather, the water keeps, the bell remembers." So, where does that leave us? With a lake that shouldn't be, a church that should have been moved and wasn't in time, a bell that was promised to go with its people and may have gone only after teaching them how to listen to water. I think the most human answer is also the most unhandsome one. The men meant to remove the bell. Weather wedged itself into their plans. Money pushed them to other tasks. The tower drowned with its throat intact. Under certain wind and water, the clapper moved. Sound rose. People heard what they were owed and tried to make do with that. If I'm wrong, the wind is a trickster, and men are easily fooled. If I'm right, then the lake is a ledger, and on some nights it reads aloud a line that bureaucrats underlined twice as superstition, and a vicar wrote once so faint you could miss it unless you held the page to the light. "If it tolls without a hand, we shall keep our hands." If this reached you, subscribe and tap the bell. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me which theory you choose. Seiche, sound trick, human hand, machinery, or cover-up. I'll pin the most persuasive comment and bring whatever new fragments we can pry from archives that prefer their quiet. Next time, we head to a city where a clock stopped at the exact moment a factory wall met the street and nobody agrees why. Until then, keep a light on, and if the lake begins to sing, count softly and count twice.